Great. Hi, everybody. This is Megan. Actually, I'll be starting with the presentation, and Ann will be wrapping up the presentation. So Ann and I both work in the Community Investment Department here at the bank, and we do want to talk with you about the Affordable Housing Program. Before we get started, I would ask, the phones have been muted, but if everyone wouldn't mind muting their own individual phones, and that way, so when we unmute the lines, we're not hearing, any typing or just conversations in the background. And then should you want to ask a question, you could unmute your own personal phone just to kind of make sure that we can all hear each other. So I would ask that folks do that. So I want to talk just a little bit about the community investment products that we do offer here at the bank. And while we'll focus on AHP today, it is just one of 5 community investment products that we have. These other products provide the opportunity to support a variety of housing and community projects and activities. So if you haven't done so already, we really encourage you that you explore each of these community dividends that are available. They're all on our community investment webpage at www.FHLB-PGH.com. And you'll want to click on the Housing and Community link. If you want to research them or talk more about them, please feel free to contact Dave Bucas or Laura Rye, who also work with us in the Community Investment Department, and they can provide you a lot more detail and see if one of these products might be a fit for you. So with that, we'll get started on AHP, and we really do appreciate the time that you're taking on your lunch hour to learn about the 2016 Affordable Housing Program and how it can potentially be used to support affordable housing projects in your community. And we'll be focusing on housing for special needs, homeless, and owner-occupied rehab as well. But you don't have to do one of those components to get funding, but it's just a part of it. So we'll provide you with an overview of AHP, and we do encourage you to check out our website. There is so much information, resources, and even additional webinars on there. We have an extended version of this webinar that's on the website that's been recorded that goes into a lot more detail. So if you want to learn more, make sure you look at those resources. So many of you on the call today are tied to affordable housing in one way or another, and I think that we can all agree that housing, particularly affordable housing, it's really an important factor in local community growth and stability. And AHP is a flexible source of subsidy for affordable housing projects that can really be used in conjunction with a variety of financing structures, either as a gap source or really as one of the primary sources depending upon the type and scale of the project that you're considering. And I know all of us know the importance of housing, but as you're promoting your project in your community, we really hope that you're highlighting not only the creation of the physical units, but also talking about the spin-off benefits that housing can generate in these communities. We here at the Home Loan Bank, we always like to highlight real projects that were awarded AHP funds. It just really kind of helps bring the program to life. And we love to see the cooperation between the Federal Home Loan Bank's members and the project sponsors and the work that's completed in these communities. So the project we want to highlight today is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. United Neighborhood Community Development Corporation partnered with People's Security Bank and Trust Company, who's the Home Loan Bank member, and they submitted an AHP application to renovate the former West Pittston High School that closed as a school nearly 4 decades ago. So this project turned a former school into 22 affordable apartments for senior citizens. And as the CEO of United Neighborhood Community Development Corporation said, that the AHP funding through People's Security Bank and Trust was a key component to allowing them to complete this project that offers intensive supportive services for residents. So it's really projects like these that help stabilize the community and provide much needed housing for families and individuals that we love to see here at the bank. So before we jump into the presentation, I just want to briefly review what we'll talk about today. And we'll start with a quick overview of some of the basic elements of AHP, and then we'll kind of cover a step-by-step process. We'll highlight how you register for AHP, and then also discuss AHP's main components related to the scoring review and feasibility review. We'll talk about what happens after an AHP grant has been awarded, and then we'll open up the line for general questions. And we really ask, sometimes when we do these webinars, we get a lot of questions and we're not able to respond to everybody. So if we don't get to your question, please send us an email and get in touch with us, and we'd be happy to talk about it. Also, if you have a very project-specific question, it's really best if you reach out to us one-on-one afterwards so that we can make sure that we're taking a lot of things into consideration before we provide you with an answer. I already mentioned that AHP is a subsidy source for affordable housing, and the standard that we use for affordability for targeted households is defined as households with incomes at or below 80% of the area median income. And that area median income is defined by the income limits that are published periodically by HUD, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And this AHP subsidy, it can either be taken as what we refer to as a direct subsidy, or basically a grant, or as a subsidized advance. The predominant request we see is for this direct subsidy or grant option, and the maximum amount that a AHP subsidy per project that can be awarded is $650,000. So without getting into a whole detailed explanation of how the Home Loan Bank works, the key takeaway from the last point on this slide is that the Federal Home Loan Bank, we are cooperatively owned by member financial institutions, and we offer AHP and other community investment products to communities through our participating members who serve in these communities. So in order to access AHP as a resource, housing project sponsors, you have to partner with a member financial institution who then applies on your behalf. And this sponsor member, that's what we call this applicant relationship, it's really a critical feature of the program. So if you as a sponsor or the developer would like to get involved, or if you're a member listening on the call and you'd like to get involved in AHP, but you may not have that match, that either member or sponsor partnership, we may be able to assist you with that match. So make sure you give us a call or send us an email afterwards, and we can discuss that match process further. There are a number of threshold eligibility requirements that you have to consider as you think about an AHP application. The first requirement addresses that income of households that I talked about earlier that are targeted by the proposed project, and you'll note that there are different thresholds for rental versus owner-occupied projects. AHP funding is subject to retention requirements, so you're in a long-term relationship with the bank. It's 15 years for rental and 5 years for homeownership projects. These retention requirements, they set the period of time in which the project is expected to maintain affordability. And we also, during that time, you're subject to certain compliance requirements and monitoring and reporting. And a lot of it is related to that check on the affordability of the project and also the income of the folks who are living there. You, as a project, you must also meet fair housing requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a $650,000 subsidy per project limit. And AHP funds that are requested, they must be used for an eligible purpose. And as you can see on this slide here, in the terms of developments or development-related activities that the AHP subsidy can support, it really is very broad. We see so many different types of applications. Small one-unit homeownership projects that are maybe sponsored by a Habitat for Humanity, to complex multi-million-dollar tax credit projects. Different project types, they can be competitive, and it really all depends on whether or not your project is meeting our scoring priorities and feasibility guidelines, which we'll talk about more later. So if the project you're considering includes something outside of this list, you really should give us a call first or send us an email, because we want to make sure that it is considered an eligible use before you go through with the whole application process. There are 4 main components to AHP, and this slide lists those components in a nutshell. And the first is scoring. All applications are scored out of 100 points against the bank's established housing priorities. Our implementation plan, we'll talk about our implementation plan a lot throughout the webinar and anytime you talk to us, because it is updated each year. It is available online, and this is our guiding document for the program. You have to become familiar, you have to really get to know this document to have a successful AHP application. Those projects that score high enough, they then undergo a feasibility review where the application is underwritten against the bank's feasibility guidelines. All those details are also in our implementation plan. And should your project be awarded funds, those funds are then dispersed to the project once costs have been incurred. So this is not an advancement of funds. It really is more of a reimbursement of funds. And awarded projects, as I said, are subject to long-term compliance monitoring. Again, 5 years for a homeownership project and 15 years for rental. So let's talk about that application process. If you break it down, the AHP application preparation process, there's basically 3 critical steps: review, partner, and prepare. And within each of those steps, there are important actions that we think need to be considered to make sure that you're not only doing a complete application, but also a competitive application. So that first step, the review step, it's all about due diligence. And based on that due diligence, establishing a plan of attack, if you will, of bringing all of these moving parts together by the August 11th deadline, which is when all the projects have to be into us. In this review step, the implementation plan, which I mentioned, is a critical part of your due diligence. It's really the starting point. Everything that you do should flow from the implementation plan because that's what we use to score and judge feasibility. The application is an online application, and it will open on June 6th. But you don't have to wait until the online application opens on June 6th to begin the process of completing required forms. You can really start on them now. They're all available on the website. You can work on them, have them completed. Then they can be uploaded to the application later when the system opens for input. We also can provide project-based technical assistance upon request, and you can find the request form online. This option is particularly valuable to anybody who's submitting for the first time. We can provide clarification of scoring and feasibility issues as they pertain specifically to your project that you're proposing. Another thing is that you can register now online for our system, and you'll get a unique user ID and password so that you're all set for June 6th when the system opens. There is a demonstration online that you can watch that can help you register for yourself in the system. And I'll cover the registration a little bit more on the next slide. But that second step of the process, of that three-part process I was talking about, the second step is to really establish that partnership, which is so important with a FHLBank member, and to talk with them about the different roles and who's going to do what throughout the process, and talking about those key dates as well as you develop your application. The third bullet here talks about identifying that partnership again, and if you do not have a member, or if you are a member and you don't have a sponsor, we may be able to help facilitate in that match. The third step is to prepare the application and submit it to the Home Loan Bank, and there is an approval process as well to submit it, which we'll talk about. So as I said, you can start by registering yourself now in the system so that you're all set for June 6th, and this slide here kind of talks you through it. You want to visit our website. You click on that blue Bank for Bank button. It'll bring you to the login page. And on this page, where the black arrow is pointing, is where you click to register yourself as a new sponsor. The system then guides you through this process to register, and then you can either create or attach yourself to an organization. Now, please note, any consultants on the line, you will want to attach yourself to the consultant agency, not to the sponsor that you're working with, not to the developer, nonprofit that you're working with. You want to make sure you're attached to your consulting agency. Also, any registrants, you have to only register yourself once, not more than once, because it can create issues in the system. And if you have any questions as you're going through this process, just please let us know. A quick note to members, so whether there's members on the line or if you're talking with your member, their process for accessing the online application and the system is a little bit different than sponsors. So just make sure that they know the process is different. The steps are listed here on this slide, but they can also give us a call and we'd be happy to get them all set up. Now, the application process, if there's any HP vets on here, they know it is a lengthy one. The round opens on June 6th, which is when you can begin inputting your information into the online system. All pages in the system, they must be fully completed, sponsor approved, and then member approved by Thursday, August 11th at 5 p.m. to be considered accepted by the bank. The system actually shuts down at 5 p.m. There is not a possibility of an extension, and so we cannot stress enough how important it is to initiate your application early and start the process, especially if it's your first time applying. Another thing that's really important to note is that a perfect score is not required for funding. 2015 was a very competitive year. We had 163 applications that were submitted and only 65 were approved. The highest score in 2015 was 76.5, and then the last funded project score was a 60. We're expecting a similarly competitive year for 2016 with a similar level of funding of about $23 million available in the round. I'm now going to move into talking about scoring. This slide and the next really outline the scoring categories that the bank established based on our district, or Pennsylvania, Delaware, and West Virginia's housing priorities. There are 11 scoring categories that are spread out over a 100-point scoring system. And on the right-hand side, under point allocation, you can see that each scoring category either is fixed or variable. The fixed categories receive basically an all-or-nothing score. And for the variable categories, there's a range of points that may be awarded, and it depends on how your application meets the priorities within that category. Our implementation plan, that really important document that I keep talking about, it explains all of these scoring categories in detail. So it's not enough just to say, yes, we have donated property, but the application process requires different and sufficient documentation depending upon the category to help support your claim that you're making in the app. The documentation requirements are all outlined in the I-Plan, the implementation plan, and there's also other resources that are available on our website, so make sure you take a look and see what's required as you develop your application. I'm going to briefly highlight what these scoring categories are. So if a project has land or property which has been donated, it can be met in one of three ways as outlined in the I-Plan. We have a category that the sponsorship by nonprofit. So if your project is sponsored by a nonprofit or government entity, but also has integral involvement in the project, you could be awarded points. There's a category for targeting households with lower incomes, and basically more points are awarded to units that reserve housing for folks with lower incomes. You could also receive points for providing housing that's reserving units for homeless. I'll cover that in more detail in a couple of slides. And also if your project provides empowerment services, so things like on-site health screenings, financial literacy counseling, budgeting to the project residents, there is a menu of options there that your project may be eligible for points. Your project can also be eligible for points if the project reserves housing for persons with special needs. I'll cover that in a little bit more detail a little later. If the project's considered in a rural area, is determined by USDA. There's points available for projects that have additional member financial participation. Other than just submitting the HP application, they have an additional stake in the project. If the project is ready to proceed based on elements outlined in the implementation plan, so things like site control, zoning, environmental remediation, and funding commitments, that's kind of an all or nothing category. So that's one of our more complex categories. You'll want to make sure you really review that. And the less subsidy per AHP unit that's used, the higher the points are awarded. So that subsidy per unit is a variable scoring. And the final category is community stability. There are multiple techniques, a whole menu, which your project may be eligible for, things like redevelopment of blighted property, consistency with a community plan, architectural compatibility, and many more. So make sure you read that implementation plan for more details on our scoring priorities, as well as how your project compares to our feasibility guidelines, which Ann will cover in a little bit. You'll want to take a look at how your project matches up with these scores to determine if you'll be competitive, keeping in mind that the last year's funded application was a score of 60. But note that that range can fluctuate a bit year to year. But if you're scoring, in the 40s, you need to take a look at your priorities and also our scoring and see if AHP would be right for you. So getting into the homeless, special needs, and owner-occupied rehab specifics. So we recently changed our homeless and special needs point categories to allow for more points for these providers who reserve housing units for homeless or for persons with special needs. And now these two categories are not mutually exclusive. The same units can be reserved for both homeless and special needs if the resident meets the bank's definition of homeless and special needs. So housing for homeless specifically, it's a 6-point variable category. So projects that reserve more units for homeless are awarded with a higher score. Projects that reserve 50% or more of their total units for homeless households will receive 6 points. Projects that reserve a minimum of 20% to less than 50% of their units for homeless households, they can receive 3 points. And any project, if you're reserving anything less than 20%, it will not have met the threshold and is not considered eligible for homeless points. Our definition of homelessness is shown on this slide, and note that our definition of homelessness is a little bit broader than HUD's definition. Also, transitional housing projects, excluding overnight shelters, they are eligible for scoring points, but they must meet a minimum 6-month occupancy requirement. The special needs category is listed here on this slide, and like the housing for homeless, this is a variable scoring category of up to 8 points. Projects that set aside at least 20% of their units but less than 50% of their units for households with at least one individual with special needs. It doesn't have to be the main head of household, just an individual living in the household with special needs can be awarded 4 points. And any project that reserves over 50% of their units for special needs will receive the full 8 points. So our definition of eligible populations with special needs is on the left-hand side. So you do have to also demonstrate through documentation to verify that a resident in the household, whether that's a tenant or home buyer, does have special needs. That occurs, and the same goes with homeless. That occurs in our monitoring process. So the last kind of special attention to scoring that I want to focus on is within our community stability category. This year we changed the point allotment for owner-occupied rehabilitation projects. It used to be 3 points, but now projects may receive either 5 or 10 points, and depending on the type of work and the percentage of units that meet each threshold. So to receive 10 points, the sponsor must commit that at least 75% of the project properties will be fully comprehensively inspected by a qualified individual. The qualified individual must certify that all hazardous or uninhabitable conditions will be corrected at project completion. And that individual must also certify that all major systems will have a reasonable or 5 years remaining useful life at project completion. So it's important to note that if you're doing this type of project, no documentation is required at application for these techniques, but if the project commits to that 10 points, the project will need to complete an owner-occupied sponsor and homeowner certification form at project completion, which basically checks off that those things outlined on that slide were completed for 75% of the units. So if you're a project and you're thinking, you know, I can't really commit to the 75% or to that full level because we're just doing, you know, one component rehab or accessibility rehab, you may elect for that 5 points. Again, there's no documentation required up front at application. So that concludes the scoring section of the presentation, and I want to stress that as with all scoring techniques, when you're completing your application, you are committing to what you describe. So if you are awarded funds and you fail to adhere to that scoring category, so say you're going to reserve units for homeless and then it turns out, oh, you actually don't, we could take those points away and then your project could be subject to you know, recapturing of any dispersed funds or reducing the subsidy allotment. So it's really important that you are comfortable committing to what you describe in the application. This also is not only just if you can't do it, but if you don't have proper documentation to verify that what you've done, that can happen as well. So also please note that during scoring, we only review what's submitted to us in the application as of the round close date. So we can't have any waivers for any documentation, or we're not going to come back and ask you for clarifications when it comes to scoring. So we don't look at outside documentation either to determine a scoring category. It is only what you give us related to scoring by the August 11th deadline. So before I turn it over to Ann, who will discuss feasibility and kind of wrap up the webinar, we want to present you with another case study to show you how AHP can be used to benefit your community. This project is called Decker's Court. It was the second phase of a 10-unit home ownership project in Morgantown, West Virginia. It will construct a total of 5 units, total development costs of $679,000. And the nonprofit project sponsor, they requested a $250,000 AHP funding to ensure that the end mortgages to these that will be made to the affordable, that the end mortgages will be affordable to the home buyers, and their focus of targeting was with folks with income at or below 60% of the area median income. The sponsor is going to originate the mortgages at 0% interest, and upon completion, sell the portfolio to participating member bank. And in addition to purchasing the loan portfolio, sponsoring their AHP application, the member also provided them with a short-term construction loan for the project. So that's our Deckers Court Phase 2 project. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ann.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. Switching gears just a little bit, so Megan had talked about the scoring of the applications and how they're then ranked by score from the highest to the lowest on the claim made in the application. And like she mentioned, if the documentation that was provided was sufficient to justify the claim. Now next, what I'll be talking about is how we complete a feasibility review on those applications, determined to be in the competitive range, and that range is determined by the amount of AHP funding requested versus the amount of AHP funding available. So the point here is that even if your project scores well and it is in the competitive range, if it fails to pass our feasibility review, it can't be awarded funding. So as you're developing your applications, please don't become so focused on the scoring points that you overlook the pertinent feasibility standards as they pertain to your application. So I'll cover some of the primary feasibility factors outlined in the red box here in today's presentation, but the implementation plan lists many more guidelines that you'll also need to know. It's important to know that if your application scores high enough, at this stage, we will likely be talking to you in more detail about your project. And it's at this stage that additional information may be requested to determine the feasibility of the project. So it's important that you are timely in submitting the documentation to us when we request it, so that we can ensure adequate review of the project. So one of the primary focus points for the feasibility review is the determination of the project's need for the AHP subsidy requested and the project's overall viability. The primary documentation used to make these determinations are the project's financial information. So on this slide, we've listed financial documentation required and whether or not it is required of either owner-occupied or rental projects or both. All of the required forms are contained in the financial forms spreadsheet, which are available on the AHP webpage, and there are separate templates for rental and owner-occupied projects. The spreadsheets can be downloaded now and worked on while you're waiting for the online application to open on June 6th. So even if you just want to check them out to see what kind of information we're asking for, you can do that now. It's really important when completing these spreadsheets to only type directly into the spreadsheet. We've had people copy and paste and alter spreadsheets, which breaks hidden formulas and rules. And when this happens, the system will not upload the spreadsheet correctly. People have even had to go back and retype their spreadsheets when they break these formulas and rules. So be sure to read the instructions tab on the spreadsheet, which will help you as you key in the information. Generally, for the determination of subsidy need for both rental and owner-occupied projects, the review of your sources and uses will verify the funding gap for the project and the need for the amount of funding requested. In addition, for owner-occupied projects, we will consider the gap in the proposed financing based on different categories of home buyers proposed, looking at the projected income for the home buyers and the projected sales pricing for the units. In those cases where sponsor financing is proposed for the owner-occupied units, and typically where we see this is in habitat projects. So many of you know that the habitat model is that Habitat actually provides the first mortgages to their home buyers. So that's what we call sponsor financing, because Habitat is the sponsor and they are providing the first mortgage financing to the home buyers. So we have a sponsor financing worksheet within our financials, which will be reviewed to verify the present value of that financing and how it relates to the project's financing gap. For rental projects, in addition to the sources and uses for the proposed capital improvements, we will review the projected operating revenues and expenses to determine that the resulting cash flow is adequate but not excessive, to the extent that it could support debt in lieu of the AHP subsidy requested. At the same time, we will be looking at the operating cash flow as an indicator of long-term viability over the 15-year compliance term for AHP. Those are some of the things that we'll be looking at to determine the need for AHP subsidy and project viability, and consequently some of the things you should be considering as you're developing your applications. Next, in determining the cost reasonableness of a project, we use a couple of different approaches based on the type of project you are submitting. Please review the implementation plan to see which guideline we would use to determine the cost reasonableness based on your project's type. Ways we make cost reasonableness determinations based on project type are through a Marshall and Swift analysis, which is an estimator tool. Projects are limited to 10% over the Marshall and Swift analysis with justifiable cause. We also compare the project to local usual and customary costs. A cost can be validated by a third party or a bidding process, and those rental projects that are approved must submit a form completed by a third party that reviews the project's cost. Make sure that you check the implementation plan to see how we will determine cost reasonableness for your project type. So that's it for the underwriting that we do of the projects. Now wanted to mention that we anticipate that funding awards will be announced on December 15th. That's when our board of directors meets and they approve the projects for this year. And if you're fortunate to get an award of AHP, the post-award phase of the process begins immediately, and then that's what we want to briefly talk about next. Upon the AHP award, you will have entered into a long-term relationship with the bank, as Megan mentioned. It's 15 years for rental projects and 5 years for owner-occupied projects. So it's important that in your decision about participating in AHP, that you consider what will be expected of you in the post-award phase of that process. So there should really be no surprises. This slide and the next one provides just a glimpse of some of the major expectations and the respective roles played by the sponsors and members in that post-award period. I won't go over each of these individually. You can certainly read for yourself and review the details for each in attachment D of our implementation plan and other guides and references that are available on our webpage. I would call your attention to a few items, starting with the execution of the tri-party agreement, which is one of the first things that will be expected of you post-award. That document will outline the relationship between three parties: the sponsor, the member applicant, and the Federal Home Loan Bank. It will also help clarify roles and responsibilities. So on this next slide, I want to highlight the compliance review upon completion, which will happen, as the name implies, when you complete your project. And it will, in essence, confirm that you've delivered on all the things that you represented in your application. Again, these last two slides cover just some of the highlights for post-award activities. So please refer to attachment D of the implementation plan for a more complete description and what is expected. As was the case for the scoring and feasibility process we described in conjunction with the application process, documentation and communication are key to a successful post-award relationship. Throughout the 15 years for rental and 5 years for homeownership, we will be requesting documentation from you on income, tenant rent paid if applicable, and other key components related to scoring. This can be on a relatively consistent basis. It may be at least every 2 years. We can't stress enough the importance of documentation for your project. As we know, 15 years is a long time. As staff may change, but the project is still expected and required to comply with the AHP regulation. We have a disbursement and monitoring recorded webinar available on our website that will be helpful for you to review as well. So finally, we want to talk a little bit about recommended next steps. Most of these recommendations we've already discussed, but we feel it's important to reemphasize things like using our webpage as a resource, developing that relationship with your Federal Home Loan Bank member institution, completing your registration for system access if that's necessary, and taking advantage of technical assistance for your project. So the takeaway for the key date slide here is start early. Although we here at the bank like to think that the AHP application process is relatively simple and straightforward, there are, as you will see, a lot of moving parts, and some of those parts have significant scoring or feasibility implications. So the earlier you get started, the more care can be taken as far as you make sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. The key dates for this year's funding round are shown on the slide. Again, opening on June 6th. That's for the application input. Our online system will open. Want to note also that on July 29th, technical assistance will end. So if you're thinking about submitting an AHP project, please get in touch with us. You can, email us with questions, but going through that formal technical assistance process would really be good if you're a first-time AHP user. And that process can be found on our website as to how to do technical assistance. August 11th is when applications are due to us, and then December 15th, the grant awards will be announced by the approval of our board of directors. In 2016, the available funds for AHP will be about $23 million, likely a little more than that. That's similar to last year's available funding, and we are also expecting a similar number of applications. If you remember on a prior slide, Megan had talked about receiving 163 applications last year. So like last year, we expect another competitive affordable housing program round. There are already available guides and templates and forms available to you on our website. So if you think that either based on this webinar or and other due diligence you've done, if you think that AHP would be a good fit for your affordable housing project, please go ahead and get started with your homework. A lot of the forms can be done ahead of time, so the online application opens June 6th, and then you'll be able to just upload them to the AHP online system. If you haven't visited our webpage, please do so. We'd like to talk about two of our community investment products that have the opportunity to go hand in hand with an AHP project that you may be working on. The Community Lending Program, or CLP, is a $1 billion revolving loan pool of specially priced funding available to Federal Home Loan Bank member institutions to lend to qualified projects supporting housing and economic development. Since Community Lending Program loans can only be made to members, we realize that CLP can't work for every project. However, if your project needs financing, consider asking a member about a CLP loan. Any project that meets AHP targeting would also qualify for CLP. CLP offers flexible fixed-rate financing up to 30 years. Plus, the CLP loan fund is always open. The approval process is quick, and there's no monitoring. So to apply for the Community Lending Program, your project must first qualify for member financing. Then the member institution submits an application to the Federal Home Loan Bank on your behalf. Moving forward, the CLP loan can allow for the member to extend a longer term by mitigating their interest rate risk. So to learn more about CLP, you can reach out to Kate Swanson here at the bank. For those projects that are providing for-sale housing with our other community investment product, First Front Door, the bank will match the eligible home buyer's contributions 3-to-1. This is a program that's exclusive to first-time home buyers. For every $1 of contribution the home buyer makes, the bank will provide $3 in grant assistance up to a maximum of $5,000. So depending on your project, you can use AHP and FFD together. You can visit www.firstfrontdoor.com to learn more about this product. So that concludes our presentation. You can contact Megan, Laura, Dave, or myself. All of our contact information is listed here on this slide to answer any questions you may have about AHP. Email really is the best and the fastest way that we can respond to your inquiry. As you can imagine, the closer we get to the AHP funding round, and when we do have an open AHP funding round, we receive a lot of requests for information, answering questions, so always email is the best way to get in touch with us. So we'd love to open it up for questions at this point.
Thank you. This is that was tremendous. Really got a lot of information in the last 40 minutes. So thanks to Ann and Megan. It was really informative. We do have one question from Rachel Falcove. Rachel, if you want to unmute your phone, I think we're not going to take everyone off of mute. If you have a question, just unmute by doing *7. While Rachel's unmuting, I will ask her question. Is this a one-time-a-year opportunity, or do you have to have more than one cycle of AHP applications per year?
So we only have one funding round per year. So you kind of do have to match up with that timeline. Each year the timeline's pretty similar. So if maybe this year isn't the year, you could always think about next year. Also want to note that you can submit more than one application too. So if you have the capacity and that's something that a sponsor, a developer is able to handle, you can apply for more than one project within one funding round.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Rachel, is that you?
Yes. That was my question. You got it. Thank you.
Good.
Great. Do we have other folks on the phone who have a question or comments? Again, it's *7. It's a quiet group today.
It's Friday lunch.
Yeah, again, it's *7.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I was wondering when the spend down time limit was for this funding, if it begins in December.
If your project is awarded, you could draw down funds usually in mid-January. That's when you would be able to, mid-January of the following year. So it's third week or so in January. We always do put that date in the award letter.
And are you expected to spend the funds in a certain time frame?
The project should be complete within 2 years is what we like to see. As part of that ongoing monitoring, we're asking for semi-annual updates as to the status of the construction, any occupancy that's happening, but within 2 years is when we like to see the projects being completed.
Thank you.
That means constructed and occupied.
Thank you.
And maybe one other thing.
Yes?
Sorry, this is Ann. Just one other thing to note is that we can receive applications even if your project is under construction right now, as long as your project is not completed by the time that our board would make the award announcements. That's that December 15th date. So again, if projects are under construction right now and you may find that you need additional financing for your project, AHP could be a source for that. Or like many projects that we see, they haven't even broken ground yet. So you can certainly submit those projects to us as well. But just wanted to be clear that they can be in certain levels of construction or not even started yet to apply for AHP.
Thank you. Other questions? Again, it's *7. Wait a couple minutes. Might conclude a little early so people can go out and see the sun while it's still before it starts to rain. On behalf of the Housing Alliance, we want to thank for the continuing support of the Federal Home Loan Bank and of Pittsburgh for prioritizing the folks, the homeless and people with special needs populations. And we really appreciate you getting on today and telling us about your program. And again, we'll be sending out the PowerPoint presentation so everyone will have the contact information. Again, thank you so much for joining us and for presenting today.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Please stand by.